The waiting room of Westside Medical Center was bustling with activity as Maya Johnson sat quietly next to her grandmother, Elaine. The 12-year-old tried to focus on the worn magazine in her hands, but the throbbing pain behind her eyes made it difficult to concentrate. It was her third migraine this month, each one worse than the last, and today they were finally seeing a specialist. Maya Johnson, a nurse called from the doorway, clipboard in hand. Maya and her grandmother rose together, following the nurse down a hallway lined with framed medical diplomas and certificates. Maya counted the tiles on the floor as they walked, a distraction technique her father had taught her to manage anxiety. "Dr. Patterson will be with you shortly," the nurse said with a practiced smile, taking Maya's vitals and making notes in her chart. "He's one of our top specialists." Elaine squeezed Maya's hand. "Your dad would be here if he could, sweetie. But this conference has been planned for months." Maya nodded, understanding. Her father, a doctor himself, had always made her medical appointments a priority. But this time, his medical conference halfway across the country couldn't be rescheduled. "It's okay, Grandma. I'm not scared." But the truth was, she was scared. The headaches were getting worse, sometimes making her vision blur and her stomach turn. At school, she'd had to leave class twice last week when the pain became unbearable. 20 minutes passed before the door finally opened. Dr. Patterson walked in without looking up, his attention fixed on the tablet in his hands. He was a tall man with graying hair at his temples and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. "So, we have," he began, finally glancing up. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight tightening around the eyes, a momentary pause. "Maya Johnson." Something in his tone made Maya sit up straighter. "Yes, doctor," Elaine said. "We're here about her migraines. They've been getting more frequent and severe." Dr. Patterson took the seat across from them, his eyes flicking between Maya and her chart. "I see, and how long has this been going on?" "About 3 months," Maya answered. "At first it was just once in a while, but now—" "I was asking your grandmother," Dr. Patterson interrupted, not meeting Maya's eyes. "It's usually better to get information from adults. Kids tend to exaggerate symptoms." Maya fell silent, looking down at her hands. She'd never been spoken to like that by a doctor before. "My granddaughter is quite capable of explaining her own symptoms, doctor," Elaine said firmly. "She's a straight-A student and very articulate." Dr. Patterson gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Well, let's see what we're dealing with." He began asking questions, but directed them all to Elaine, even when they were about how Maya felt. As the examination continued, the doctor's manner grew increasingly dismissive. When Maya mentioned that the pain was usually worse on the left side, Dr. Patterson sighed. "You know, we see this a lot in certain communities," he said, addressing Elaine. "There's often a misunderstanding about what constitutes an actual migraine versus a regular headache. Sometimes it's just stress or poor diet." "Does she eat a lot of processed foods? Fast food?" Elaine's back stiffened. "We cook at home most nights. My son-in-law is very particular about healthy eating." Dr. Patterson murmured, making a note without commenting further. "And what does her father do?" The question seemed oddly out of place in a medical examination. Elaine hesitated before answering. "He works in healthcare." "An orderly? Nurse's aide?" Dr. Patterson asked, barely looking up. "He's in medicine," Elaine said simply, her voice cooling several degrees. Maya watched this exchange with growing discomfort. She wanted to speak up, to tell the doctor that her father was actually— but her grandmother's gentle squeeze of her hand stopped her. This was something they'd discussed before. Her father always said he wanted doctors to treat Maya based on her symptoms, not on who he was. Dr. Patterson continued the examination, checking Maya's eyes with a small light and testing her reflexes. His touch wasn't rough, but it wasn't gentle either. Clinical and detached in a way that made Maya feel like an inconvenience rather than a patient. "Well, I don't see anything immediately concerning," he concluded, rolling his chair back slightly. "Probably just typical teenage stress. Girls her age often get dramatic about normal growing pains." "Dramatic?" Elaine repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "My granddaughter missed 3 days of school last month because the pain was so severe she couldn't get out of bed. Her regular doctor referred us to you specifically because he was concerned about the increasing frequency." Dr. Patterson sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Look, I understand you're worried, but we have to be practical about medical resources. The imaging tests her doctor suggested are expensive and likely unnecessary. Kids from, well, patients on your type of insurance plan often come in wanting all sorts of tests that just aren't justified by their symptoms. Maya felt a hot flush of shame, though she wasn't entirely sure why. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet somehow the doctor was making her feel like she had. My insurance covers those tests fully, Elaine said evenly, and I'd like them done. Dr. Patterson's mouth thinned to a line. I really don't think... Is there a problem with ordering the tests that her primary care doctor recommended? Elaine pressed, her voice firm but controlled. The doctor looked between them, then sighed heavily. Fine. We'll do a basic MRI, but I'm telling you now it's going to come back normal. These headaches are probably just... He waved his hand dismissively. Psychosomatic. Attention-seeking behavior isn't uncommon in adolescence. Maya felt tears prickling behind her eyes. She wasn't making this up. The pain was real, sometimes so bad she couldn't even turn her head without feeling like she might throw up. When can we schedule the MRI? Elaine asked, ignoring his comment. The nurse will set it up. Probably be a few weeks before we can fit you in. We prioritize urgent cases. He stood up, clearly considering the appointment over. A few weeks? Elaine's voice rose slightly. She's in pain now. Well, that's the reality of our scheduling, he said with a shrug. Unless, of course, there are special circumstances we should know about. He raised an eyebrow as if inviting them to reveal some hidden connection that might move them up the list. Just her pain, Elaine said quietly. That should be special enough. Dr. Patterson made a non-committal sound and headed toward the door. The nurse will be in with some information about stress management techniques and dietary recommendations. I suggest trying those before we jump to expensive tests. Some people find that regular exercise and avoiding certain cultural foods can reduce these kinds of complaints significantly. After he left, the room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Maya looked up at her grandmother, whose face was set in an expression Maya recognized, anger carefully controlled. Grandma? Maya's voice was small. Elaine took a deep breath before turning to her granddaughter. Yes, baby? Did I do something wrong? He seemed mad at me. Elaine's expression softened immediately and she pulled Maya into a hug. No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. Nothing at all. Some people just... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Some people have ideas in their heads about others before they even get to know them. That's not your fault. Maya nodded against her grandmother's shoulder, but a sick feeling had settled in her stomach that had nothing to do with her migraine. She'd felt it before, on the playground when certain kids wouldn't play with her, or at the store when security seemed to follow them more closely than other customers. Her father had explained it to her once, in a conversation that still made her throat tight when she remembered it. The nurse returned with some pamphlets and a date for the MRI, nearly a month away. Elaine took the papers without comment, her hand firm around Maya's as they walked back through the waiting room. It wasn't until they were in the car that Maya saw her, grandmother's hands shaking on the steering wheel. We're going to call your dad, Elaine said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands, and we're going to get this figured out. Maya leaned her head against the cool window glass, closing her eyes against the bright afternoon sun that made her head pound. She thought about Dr. Patterson's dismissive tone, the way he'd looked at them, or rather the way he'd avoided really looking at them at all. She thought about the tests that would now be delayed by weeks, and the pain that didn't feel psychosomatic at all, but very real. What she didn't know yet was that this appointment, as hurtful as it had been, was about to set in motion events that would change everything, not just for her, but for many patients who would come after her, because while Dr. Patterson might have seen just another black girl with an overprotective grandmother, what he failed to see was who was really in his examination room that day, and he would find out soon enough. The drive home from Westside Medical Center was quiet. Maya leaned her head against the window, watching raindrops race down the glass, merging and disappearing. Her grandmother kept glancing over, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. How's your head feeling, baby? Elaine asked, her voice deliberately gentle. Maya shrugged. The same. But it wasn't just her head hurting anymore. There was another kind of pain, one she couldn't quite name but felt deep in her chest. When they pulled into the driveway of their 2-story brick home, Maya noticed her grandmother's hands were still shaking slightly as she turned off the engine. For a moment, they both sat in silence. That wasn't right, Elaine finally said. The way he treated you wasn't right. Maya traced a pattern on the condensation of the window. It's okay, Grandma. No, it's not, Elaine replied, turning in her seat to face her granddaughter. And I don't want you thinking for 1 second that it is. You deserve respect from everyone, especially doctors who are supposed to be helping you. Maya nodded, but the truth was, a small part of her had already started wondering if maybe Dr. Patterson was right. Maybe she was just being dramatic. Maybe the pain wasn't as bad as she thought. These doubts crept in like shadows, even though she knew better. Inside the house, Maya went straight to her room, claiming she wanted to lie down. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the science fair trophies on her bookshelf and the family photos covering her wall. One in particular caught her eye. A picture of her father in his white coat, his arm around Maya on career day at school last year. The pride in his eyes as he stood next to her was unmistakable. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Zoe. How did it go with the specialist? Maya's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How could she explain what happened? That the doctor had made her feel small, unimportant, unheard? That he'd looked at her and her grandmother and somehow decided they weren't worth his time or expertise? It was fine, she typed back. No big deal. Downstairs, Elaine paced the kitchen, phone in hand. It was nearly midnight in Singapore, where her son-in-law was attending the International Neurology Conference. David Johnson had been reluctant to leave when Maya's migraines were getting worse, but the conference had been planned for months, and he was delivering a keynote speech on innovative surgical techniques he'd pioneered. She hesitated only briefly before dialing. Some things couldn't wait. David answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. Elaine, is everything okay? Is Maya? She's okay physically, Elaine cut in. But there's something you need to know. Halfway across the world, David Johnson sat up in his hotel bed, switching on the lamp and reaching for his glasses. As Elaine recounted the appointment, her voice growing tighter with each detail, David felt a familiar pressure building in his chest, a combination of fury and heartbreak that he'd experienced too many times in his life. He didn't even examine her properly, David, Elaine continued. Barely touched her. Kept talking about certain communities and cultural foods like we're all the same. Suggested she was making it up for attention. David closed his eyes, seeing too clearly what had happened. In his 22 years as a doctor, 15 of those as a neurosurgeon, he'd witnessed this kind of treatment directed at others, had even experienced it himself before his reputation preceded him. But to hear it happening to his daughter, and the MRI, he asked, his voice controlled despite the storm brewing inside him. Scheduled for 3 weeks from now. He said they prioritize urgent cases. When I pushed back, he practically asked if we had connections that could move us up the list. David let out a slow breath. The irony wasn't lost on him. The specialist didn't know that Maya's father was Dr. David Johnson, recently recruited by Westside Medical Center as their new head of neurosurgery, a position he hadn't officially started yet. He'd specifically asked that his daughter be treated as any other patient would be, not wanting special treatment because of his position. But this wasn't special treatment Maya had been denied. It was basic human dignity and proper medical care. I'm coming home, David said, already mentally calculating the fastest route back. But your speech can be delivered by video if necessary. Maya comes first. Always. After hanging up, David stood at the window of his hotel room looking out at the Singapore skyline but seeing nothing. This moment crystallized everything he'd been fighting against his entire career. The disparities in healthcare, the biases that crept into medical decisions, the dismissal of symptoms based on a patient's appearance rather than their presentation. He'd chosen Westside Medical Center partly because of their public commitment to addressing these very issues. Their diversity and inclusion initiatives had been heavily featured in his recruitment package. But clearly, there was a gap between public statements and actual patient experiences. As he packed his suitcase, memories from his own childhood surfaced. His mother being told her chest pain was probably just anxiety, only to suffer a heart attack 3 days later. His brother's broken arm being set without adequate pain medication because the doctor assumed they can handle more pain. The countless small and large indignities that accumulated over a lifetime. David had worked tirelessly to change the system from within, publishing papers on healthcare disparities, serving on hospital ethics committees, mentoring minority medical students. But in this moment, all of that felt insufficient. The system had failed his daughter, just as it had failed countless others. Back in Connecticut, Maya finally emerged from her room for dinner. She picked at her food while Elaine moved around the kitchen, unusually busy with cleaning already spotless counters. "I talked to your dad," Elaine finally said. Sitting down across from Maya, Maya's head snapped up. "You called him?" "Grandma, his conference is less important than you," Elaine finished firmly. "He's catching the next flight home." "But he's supposed to give that big speech," Maya protested, guilt mingling with relief at the thought of her father coming home. "He can give speeches any time. Right now you need him, and that's all that matters to him." Maya pushed her plate away, a lump forming in her throat. "Dr. Patterson thinks I'm making it all up," she whispered. What if the tests don't show anything? What if it really is all in my head?" Elaine reached across the table, taking Maya's hands in hers. "Listen to me. I've watched you curl up in pain too many times to count these past few months. I've seen you miss school and dance class and things you love because you physically couldn't get out of bed. That is real. Your pain is real, and we will keep fighting until we find a doctor who listens." That night, Maya couldn't sleep. The pain behind her eyes had dulled to a persistent ache, but her mind kept replaying Dr. Patterson's dismissive tone, the way he'd looked through her, rather than at her. She wondered how many other kids had sat in that same examination room and been treated the same way. Kids whose parents weren't doctors, who might not know how to push back or demand better. The thought made her angry, and the anger felt better than the shame that had followed her home from the appointment. Around midnight, her phone lit up with a text from her father. "Just boarded. Be home by tomorrow afternoon. Love you, Firefly. We'll figure this out together." Maya held the phone against her heart. Her dad had always taught her that there were two kinds of people in the world: those who saw problems and complained about them, and those who saw problems and fixed them. He was firmly in the second category, and he'd raised Maya to be the same way. For the first time since the appointment, Maya felt something other than hurt and confusion. She felt a spark of determination. Dr. Patterson had made her feel small today, but with her father coming home, she had a feeling things were about to change. What Maya didn't know yet was just how significant that change would be. Not just for her, but for Westside Medical Center and every patient who would walk through its doors in the future. Dr. Patterson thought he was dealing with a helpless child and her grandmother. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. David Johnson arrived home just after 2 in the afternoon, his carry-on suitcase trailing behind him as he walked through the front door. He'd been traveling for nearly 20 hours straight, a red-eye from Singapore to Los Angeles, then another flight to Connecticut, followed by a taxi ride home. Exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes were alert and focused. "Dad!" Maya rushed down the stairs, practically leaping into his arms. David dropped his suitcase, catching his daughter in a tight embrace. Over her shoulder, he met Elaine's eyes, seeing the mixture of relief and lingering anger there. "How's my favorite scientist doing?" he asked, pulling back to look at Maya's face. "I'm okay," she said automatically. "Headache." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "A little one. Not as bad as yesterday." David's jaw tightened briefly, but his smile remained gentle. "Let's sit down and talk, okay? I want to hear everything about what happened." In the living room, Maya recounted the appointment with Dr. Patterson, sometimes stumbling over her words, sometimes falling silent as she remembered particularly upsetting moments. David listened without interrupting, though Elaine occasionally filled in details Maya omitted, and then he said the headaches were probably just psychosomatic. Maya finished, the unfamiliar word coming out carefully, like I was making them up for attention. David took a deep breath, controlling his expression. "And how did that make you feel?" Maya looked down at her hands. Like maybe he was right. Like maybe I am just being dramatic. "Maya, look at me," David said, his voice firm but kind. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "I've been a doctor for over 20 years. I've treated thousands of patients with migraines and other neurological conditions. What you're experiencing is real. The pain is real. And no good doctor dismisses a patient's symptoms without proper investigation. But what if the tests don't show anything?" Maya asked, voicing the fear that had kept her awake the night before. "Then we keep looking for answers," David said simply. Sometimes diagnoses take time, and that's okay. What's not okay is a doctor making you feel like your concerns don't matter. He turned to Elaine. The MRI is scheduled for 3 weeks from now? Elaine nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. He said they prioritize urgent cases. David stood up, pulling his phone from his pocket. I need to make a few calls. He walked into the kitchen, and though he spoke quietly, Maya and Elaine could hear the controlled anger in his tone. 10 minutes later, he returned. Your MRI has been rescheduled for tomorrow morning at 9, he announced. Elaine raised her eyebrows. You pulled some strings. I made a call to Dr. Chen, the head of radiology. We worked together in Boston years ago. I explained the situation, not who I am in relation to the hospital, just that my daughter needs proper care. He sat back down beside Maya. He agreed that 3 weeks is unacceptable for a pediatric patient with your symptoms. Maya looked relieved, but also confused. But what about Dr. Patterson? David's expression grew serious. That's what we need to talk about next. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I've been thinking about this the entire flight home. There are several ways we could handle this situation. Like what? Maya asked. Well, we could file a formal complaint with the hospital administration. We could request a different specialist. We could confront Dr. Patterson directly. He paused. Or I could accompany you to your follow-up appointment, not just as your dad, but in my professional capacity. Elaine tilted her head. You mean let him know who you are? Yes. David ran a hand over his face. I've been wrestling with this decision. On one hand, I don't want to use my position for special treatment. On the other hand, this isn't about special treatment, Elaine interrupted. This is about a doctor who failed to provide proper care because of his own biases. David nodded. Exactly. And that's what concerns me most, not just how he treated Maya, but how many other patients receive the same treatment who don't have a neurosurgeon in the family to advocate for them. Maya had been listening quietly, her brow furrowed in thought. Dad, she said finally, remember that project I did for school last year? About systems of inequality? David smiled slightly. I do. You got an A+. You told me then that sometimes the most effective change happens from within systems, not just by complaining about them from the outside. Maya sat up straighter. If you're going to be working at Westside Medical Center anyway, maybe this is a chance to change things, not just for me, but for everyone. David and Elaine exchanged a look of surprised pride. That's a very mature way of looking at it, David said. So what are you going to do? Maya asked. David took his time answering, weighing his options carefully. I think, he said slowly, that I'm going to call Dr. Harrington, the hospital director who recruited me, and have an honest conversation about what happened. Not to get Dr. Patterson in trouble, but to address a systemic problem. And then, Elaine prompted, and then I'm going to accompany you to your follow-up appointment after the MRI, as both your father and as Dr. David Johnson, the new head of neurosurgery. Maya's eyes widened. Won't that be awkward? David smiled, but there was no humor in it. Probably. But sometimes awkward conversations are necessary for growth. That evening, after Maya had gone to bed, David sat on the back porch with Elaine, both nursing cups of tea as the day's last light faded from the sky. I keep thinking about that moment in the examination room, Elaine said quietly. The way he looked at us, or didn't look at us really, like we weren't worth his time. David nodded, staring into his cup. I've been on both sides of that equation, Elaine. I've been the patient who was dismissed, and I've watched colleagues dismiss patients based on unconscious biases they wouldn't even admit to having. Does it get any easier to witness? She asked. No, he said simply. If anything, it gets harder, because the more you know, the more clearly you see the pattern. Elaine sighed. Maya handled it better than I did. I was so angry I could barely see straight driving home. She's stronger than we give her credit for, David agreed. But she shouldn't have to be strong in a doctor's office. She should just get to be a patient. The next morning, David drove Maya to the hospital for her MRI. The technicians were thorough and kind, taking time to explain the procedure and make sure Maya was comfortable. David watched through the observation window, his experienced eyes catching details most parents would miss. Afterward, as they waited for the preliminary results, Maya played a game on her phone while David reviewed the images with Dr. Chen. There's definitely something here, Dr. Chen said, pointing to an area on the scan. See this subtle variation in tissue density? I want to run a few more specialized sequences to get a better look. David nodded, relief and concern mingling in his chest. Relief that there was physical evidence of Maya's condition, concern about what it might mean for her health. When they returned home, he sat Maya down at the kitchen table. The good news is, we know why you've been having headaches, he explained gently. There's a small vascular abnormality. That means blood vessels that aren't formed quite right, putting pressure on certain areas of your brain when you're active or stressed. Is it serious? Maya asked, her voice small. It's treatable, David assured her. We caught it early, which is excellent. But it does require proper medical care and follow-up. Exactly what Dr. Patterson should have provided from the beginning. Maya was quiet for a moment. So what happens now? David reached across the table, taking her hand. Now we have your follow-up appointment with Dr. Patterson tomorrow, and we have a choice to make about how we handle this situation and what kind of change we want to create. I want to go, Maya said firmly, and I want you to come with me as the new head of neurosurgery. David studied his daughter's face, seeing determination there rather than a desire for revenge. Are you sure? Maya nodded. I've been thinking about it all day. If we just switch doctors, nothing changes. Dr. Patterson will just treat the next family the same way. But if we go back... She trailed off, searching for the right words. Then we have a chance to make a difference, David finished for her. Not just for us, but for others. As they talked into the evening, refining their approach for the next day's appointment, none of them could have predicted exactly how transformative that encounter would be. Not just for Dr. Patterson, but for the entire culture of Westside Medical Center. The morning of Maya's follow-up appointment arrived with gray skies threatening rain. As Maya stood in front of her closet, she found herself unexpectedly concerned about what to wear. Yesterday she hadn't cared, but today felt different. Important somehow. She finally settled on a purple button-down shirt and dark jeans, the outfit she'd worn for her science fair presentation last spring. It made her feel confident, and she needed that feeling today. Downstairs, her father was already dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy blue tie, his professional attire a stark contrast to the casual clothes he'd worn since arriving home. Ready for this? He asked, looking up from his coffee. Maya nodded, though butterflies danced in her stomach. Did you talk to Dr. Harrington? I did, David replied, his expression thoughtful. We had a long conversation yesterday evening. He was concerned about what happened. Is Dr. Patterson going to get fired? Maya asked, sliding into a chair at the breakfast table. David shook his head. That's not my goal, and it shouldn't be yours either. This isn't about punishment. It's about growth and change. Elaine entered the kitchen, eyebrows raised. You're a better person than I am, David. If it were up to me. I know. David smiled slightly. But firing one doctor doesn't fix a systemic problem. And truthfully, Dr. Patterson isn't a bad doctor, technically speaking. His diagnostic skills are actually quite good according to his record. Just his bedside manner and biases that need work? Elaine's tone was skeptical. Those just things can be the difference between life and death for patients, David said seriously. How many symptoms go unreported because patients don't feel comfortable? How many conditions go undiagnosed because a doctor has already decided what they're seeing before they've truly looked? Maya listened to this exchange, thinking about how different her appointment might have been with a doctor who had really seen her, really listened. Her MRI results proved she hadn't been making anything up. But what if they hadn't? Would she have given up trying to get help? The drive to Westside Medical Center was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. As David pulled into a parking space, he turned to Maya in the passenger seat. Remember, no matter what happens in there, I'm proud of you, he said. Standing up to unfairness is never easy. Maya took a deep breath and nodded. I know, Dad. The hospital corridors seemed longer today, the walk to Dr. Patterson's office stretching out before them. David had called ahead to alert the office that he would be accompanying his daughter, but he hadn't specified his professional role. When they checked in at the reception desk, the nurse looked between them with mild curiosity but didn't comment. They were shown into an examination room identical to the one from Maya's first appointment. David helped Maya onto the examination table, then took a seat in one of the plastic chairs against the wall, angling it so he faced the door. They waited for 15 minutes before there was a sharp knock and Dr. Patterson entered, eyes down on his tablet just as before. "Maya Johnson, follow-up from MRI," he muttered, before glancing up and noticing David. His expression flickered briefly with surprise. "Oh, I see we have family with us today." "Yes, my father," Maya said, her voice steadier than she expected it to be. Dr. Patterson gave David a cursory nod before turning back to Maya. "Well, I've reviewed your scans. There does appear to be a minor vascular anomaly. Nothing serious, but it does explain the headaches." David watched silently as Dr. Patterson continued, noting how the doctor's demeanor remained distant, his explanations cursory and somewhat dismissive even in the face of clear medical evidence. "We'll put you on a mild preventative medication. Should clear things up in a few weeks," Dr. Patterson said, already reaching for his prescription pad. "Excuse me, Dr. Patterson," David spoke for the first time, his voice calm but carrying a natural authority that made the other doctor pause. "Could you please explain the exact nature of the vascular anomaly you observed? The location, size, and potential treatment options?" Dr. Patterson looked annoyed at the interruption. "It's fairly technical, Mr. Johnson, but essentially—" "It's actually Dr. Johnson," David corrected mildly. Dr. Patterson paused, reassessing David with slightly narrowed eyes. "Oh, medical doctor?" "Yes, neurosurgery specifically." A flicker of unease crossed Dr. Patterson's face. "I see. Well, as I was saying, the door to the examination room opened again, and 3 people entered. An older man with silver hair in a well-cut suit, flanked by a woman in a white coat and a younger man with a clipboard. Maya recognized the older man from photos her father had shown her. Dr. Harrington, the hospital director. "Dr. Patterson," the older man said cordially, "I hope we're not interrupting." "Dr. Harrington," Patterson straightened immediately. "No, not at all. I was just explaining." "Excellent," Dr. Harrington smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I wanted to introduce you to our new head of neurosurgery, who'll be officially starting next week." He gestured toward David. "But I see you've already met." The color drained from Dr. Patterson's face as understanding dawned. His gaze darted between David and Maya, making the connection he'd failed to see before. "Dr. David Johnson," Dr. Harrington continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling in the room, "is joining us from Mass General. He's a pioneer in pediatric neurovascular procedures and will be heading our new neurovascular center of excellence." "It's a pleasure to meet you properly," David said, standing and extending his hand. Dr. Patterson took it automatically, his expression frozen somewhere between shock and dismay. Maya is my daughter, yes," David confirmed, his grip firm but not aggressive. "She was referred to you for evaluation of her migraines." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Harrington looked between them, sensing the undercurrent but not fully understanding it. "Is everything all right?" he asked. David kept his eyes on Dr. Patterson. "Maya had her initial consultation a few days ago. There were some concerns about the thoroughness of the evaluation." Dr. Patterson swallowed hard, his professional composure visibly cracking. Perhaps I was a bit rushed that day. The clinic was very busy." "Busy enough to dismiss her symptoms as psychosomatic without proper testing?" David asked quietly. "Busy enough to schedule her MRI for 3 weeks out despite clear neurological symptoms? Busy enough to make assumptions about her and her grandmother?" The other doctors in the room shifted uncomfortably. "Dr. Johnson, I assure you," Dr. Patterson began. "The MRI showed a clear arteriovenous malformation in the left temporal region," David interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Small, but positioned where it could cause significant pain during periods of increased blood pressure. It could have been caught immediately with the proper examination." Dr. Harrington's expression had grown serious. "This sounds like something we should discuss further, gentlemen. Perhaps in my office after." "With respect, Dr. Harrington," David said, "I think right here is appropriate. My daughter deserves to hear this." He turned to Maya, his expression softening. "If that's okay with you?" Maya nodded, sitting up straighter on the examination table. David turned back to Dr. Patterson. "I don't believe you're a bad doctor. Your credentials are excellent, your technical skills highly regarded, but something happened in that appointment that goes beyond a busy day or a rushed schedule." Dr. Patterson's face had gone from pale to flushed. Dr. Johnson, I don't know what your daughter and her grandmother told you, but I can assure you, I was on the phone with my mother-in-law during the entire drive home, David said quietly. I heard every detail while it was still fresh, and what I heard was a pattern I've seen too many times in my career. The room fell silent again, the only sound the distant beeping of monitors somewhere down the hallway. Maya, David continued, deserves the same thorough, respectful care as any other patient. Not because she's my daughter, not because I'm joining your staff, but because she's a human being in pain seeking help. Dr. Patterson looked at Maya, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. What he saw wasn't just the black girl he'd dismissed days earlier, but a bright, observant young person who'd been hurt by his assumptions, and the daughter of a renowned surgeon who'd witnessed his prejudice firsthand. Dr. Patterson struggled to find words. You're right. And I'm sorry, it wasn't enough. They all knew it wasn't enough, but it was a beginning, a crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable just moments before. Dr. Harrington cleared his throat. I believe we have some important discussions ahead of us. All of us. He looked at Maya with genuine concern. Young lady, I want to personally apologize for your experience at our hospital. And thank you for bringing it to our attention. Maya nodded, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. Vindication, sadness, hope, and something else she couldn't quite name. What none of them realized in that moment was that this confrontation would become a turning point, not just for Dr. Patterson, but for Westside Medical Center as a whole. The seeds of transformation had been planted, and they were about to take root in ways no one could have predicted. The meeting in Dr. Harrington's office lasted nearly 3 hours. Maya waited in the hospital cafeteria, sipping hot chocolate and working on homework while her father, Dr. Patterson, and the hospital leadership team had what her dad later called the most important conversation of his career. When David finally emerged, his face looked tired but peaceful in a way Maya hadn't expected. He sat across from her at the small cafeteria table, stealing one of her abandoned French fries. Everything okay? Maya asked cautiously. David smiled slightly. Getting there. Is Dr. Patterson in trouble? David considered this. He's at a crossroads, he said finally, and he knows it. 3 days later, David received a request that surprised him. Dr. Patterson had asked to meet, not at the hospital, but at a small coffee shop halfway between their homes. David agreed, curious about what the other doctor wanted to say away from the professional setting of Westside Medical Center. The coffee shop was quiet for a Saturday morning. Dr. Patterson was already there when David arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups in front of him. He looked different somehow, less polished, more human in jeans and a sweater instead of his white coat. I ordered you a coffee, Dr. Patterson said, as David slid into the seat across from him. Black, 2 sugars. The nurse said that's how you take it. Thank you, David said, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Dr. Patterson spoke. I've been a doctor for 23 years, he began. I've always prided myself on being objective, scientific, evidence-based. He stared into his coffee cup. It never occurred to me that I might be bringing biases into the examination room. David listened without interrupting. After our meeting, Dr. Patterson continued, I went home and couldn't sleep. So I did something I've never done before. I pulled all my patient files from the past year and sorted them. By race, by gender, by insurance type. He looked up, meeting David's eyes directly. The patterns were undeniable. Longer wait times for certain patients. Fewer tests ordered. Less time spent during consultations. David nodded. It takes courage to look at your own behavior that honestly. Not courage, Dr. Patterson shook his head. Necessity. I became a doctor to help people, all people. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. He paused. How's Maya doing? Better, David said. The medication is helping. She's back at school, back to her science experiments in the garage that make my mother-in-law nervous. Dr. Patterson smiled slightly. She seems like a remarkable young woman. She is. I owe her an apology, Dr. Patterson said. A real one, not the defensive half apology I gave in the examination room. Yes, you do, David agreed. But what you owe all your future patients is even more important. Dr. Patterson nodded slowly. I know, that's Actually, why I wanted to meet with you. I've been thinking about your comment that firing one doctor doesn't fix a systemic problem. You're right, and I want to be part of the solution, not just avoid being part of the problem. By the time they left the coffee shop 2 hours later, the foundation had been laid for something neither man had anticipated. A partnership that would transform not just their own practices, but the culture of Westside Medical Center itself. Over the following months, changes began to take root. Dr. Patterson, with a humility that surprised many of his colleagues, became an outspoken advocate for bias training among the medical staff. He shared his own experience, including the uncomfortable data from his patient files, at department meetings, creating space for other doctors to examine their own practices. David, as the new head of neurosurgery, implemented new protocols for patient evaluations that included standardized assessment tools, reducing the influence of unconscious bias. He also started a mentorship program for medical students from underrepresented backgrounds, partnering with local colleges to create pathways to medical careers. But perhaps the most significant change was the new patient advocacy program. Inspired by Maya's experience, the hospital hired and trained a diverse team of patient advocates who could be requested by anyone who felt their concerns weren't being heard. These advocates, many of whom came from healthcare backgrounds, served as bridges between patients and medical staff, ensuring that everyone received equitable, respectful care regardless of their background. 6 months after that fateful appointment, Maya sat in a different examination room at Westside Medical Center. Her treatment had been successful, the medication had reduced her headaches significantly, and she was back to her normal activities. This follow-up appointment was meant to be her last. The doctor who entered wasn't Dr. Patterson, but a young woman who introduced herself as Dr. Rivera. Maya Johnson, she said warmly. It's nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. Maya looked surprised. You have? Dr. Rivera smiled. You might not realize it, but you've become something of a legend around here. The girl who helped change Westside, Maya blushed. That wasn't really me. That was my dad. From what I've heard, it was both of you. Dr. Rivera pulled up Maya's chart on her tablet. So, the headaches have improved with the medication? Yes, Maya confirmed. I haven't had a bad one in almost a month. Excellent. Dr. Rivera reviewed the chart carefully. Your latest scan looks good too. The AVM hasn't changed in size, which is exactly what we want to see. As the appointment continued, Maya noticed the difference in how she was being treated. The careful attention, the thorough explanations, the genuine interest in her responses. It wasn't just because she was the daughter of the head of neurosurgery. She'd observed other patients in the waiting room receiving the same care. After completing her examination, Dr. Rivera asked, "Do you have any questions for me?" Maya hesitated, then asked, "How is Dr. Patterson?" Dr. Rivera looked surprised by the question. He's doing well, actually. He's become very involved in our new bias training program. In fact, he's presenting at a national conference next month about systemic changes in healthcare. She tilted her head curiously. Why do you ask? Maya shrugged. Just wondering. Later, as Maya and her father walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, they passed a large bulletin board that hadn't been there during Maya's first visit. It displayed patient satisfaction scores by department, testimonials, and photos of the patient advocacy team. Your idea? Maya asked, nodding toward the board. Actually, no, David replied. That was Dr. Patterson's initiative. Transparency, he calls it. As they pushed through the doors into the bright afternoon sunlight, Maya spotted a familiar figure walking toward the entrance. Dr. Patterson, deep in conversation with a woman in a wheelchair and a man walking beside her. Dr. Patterson looked up and saw them. After a brief hesitation, he excused himself from the couple and approached. Maya, Dr. Johnson, he greeted them, his manner different from the dismissive doctor of 6 months ago. Good news at your follow-up, I hope? All clear, David confirmed. Dr. Patterson smiled, genuine relief in his expression. Then he turned to Maya. I never properly apologized to you, he said. What happened at your first appointment? There's no excuse for it. But I want you to know that meeting you, as difficult as it was for both of us, changed my perspective in ways I needed. He paused. You helped make me a better doctor, and I'm grateful for that. Maya hadn't expected this. She glanced at her father, then back at Dr. Patterson. I'm glad things worked out the way they did. she said simply. As they walked to their car, Maya thought about how one difficult moment had sparked so much change, not just for her or Dr. Patterson, but for countless patients who would never know the story behind the improvements in their care. "Dad," she said as they reached the car, "remember when you told me there are two kinds of people in the world? Those who see problems and complain about them, and those who see problems and fix them?" David nodded, unlocking the doors. "I remember. I think there's a third kind," Maya said thoughtfully. "People who make mistakes, recognize them, and then work to fix not just that mistake, but the whole system that made it possible." David looked at his daughter over the roof of the car, pride washing over him. "When did you get so wise?" Maya smiled. "I had a good teacher." As they drove away from Westside Medical Center, neither of them could have predicted just how far-reaching the changes would become. Over the next few years, the hospital's patient advocacy program would become a model adopted by healthcare systems across the country. Dr. Patterson and Dr. Johnson would co-author papers on reducing healthcare disparities that would be required reading in medical schools. And Maya, inspired by her experience, would eventually choose a path that combined medicine and advocacy in ways that would touch thousands of lives. But that afternoon, driving home under a clear blue sky, all they knew was that something broken had begun to heal. Not just Maya's health, but a small corner of a healthcare system that had too often failed the very people it was meant to serve.